Bedtime is often seen as a comforting ritual that signifies the end of a long day. It's a time to unwind and let go of any stress or worries from the day. As we settle into our comfortable bed, we expect to wake up feeling rested and rejuvenated with the promise of a new day to come. But what if this peaceful moment was shattered by a sudden, unexpected tragedy? Such was the case in the early morning hours of July 18, 2018 in Dublin, Ohio. What was meant to be a restful night's sleep turned into a nightmare for one individual. As they closed their eyes, it would be for the final time, and the events that transpired would leave a community in shock and investigators searching for answers. Let's dive into the case of Mr. and Mrs. Osborne. Holly Osborne is a 47-year-old Ohio resident born in April 1976. She spent most of her life in Ohio and some time in New Mexico. Before the events that we are about to discuss, Holly worked as a registered nurse at Mary Rutan Hospital in Bellefontaine, Ohio. She chose nursing as a career because she wanted to make a positive difference in people's lives by providing care, comfort, and support to patients and their families. Holly was married once before and had one child with her former spouse. Her father resided in the Quincy area at the time of the incident, and it was to him that she would reach out for help. 50-year-old Dr. Christopher Osborne was born on March 17, 1968 in Victorville, California. He graduated from Parkway High School in Rockford, Ohio in 1986 before obtaining a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy in 1991 from Ohio Northern University. He became a Doctor of Osteopathy through Ohio University Heritage College in 1996 and practiced medicine for 21 years in Springfield, Tennessee and Dublin, Ohio. From the time he was young, Chris had a passion for medicine and helping other people. He once stated, "My philosophy is to put the patient first, provide physical and emotional comfort, and strive for the best care possible." Chris was a highly respected member of the community, holding a position of prestige as an ER physician at Mary Rutan Hospital. He was involved with several other area hospitals and was widely admired for his work in the medical field. Outside of work, Chris had a diverse set of interests that included cooking, playing golf, riding his motorcycle, and cheering on the Ohio State Buckeyes. He was also a devoted father to his 3 children from his previous marriage, and spending time with them was a top priority. However, Chris had another interest that sometimes got him into trouble: his eye for a pretty lady. He was a charismatic individual who could strike up a conversation with anyone, anywhere, and his charm was obvious to those who came across him. Holly and Chris met while working at Mary Rutan Hospital. After a period of dating, they got engaged and married relatively quickly in 2016. Their union would mark the second marriage for both. They moved into a 4-bedroom, 3.5-bath, nearly 5,000 square foot home that they rented in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Unfortunately for the newlyweds, it didn't take long for adversity to strike. Within months of their wedding vows, Chris admitted to having an affair. This helped set the tone for what would become a highly volatile marriage. Despite his confession, the couple decided they would attempt to work through it. But in the slightly less than 2 years they were married, Chris's infidelity would become an ongoing issue. Holly tried her best to cope with the loss of trust and her growing fear and insecurity, as well as a developing alcohol problem. During the spring of 2018, the couple exchanged text messages that showed a pattern of separating and then making up several times. In one series of messages, Holly said, "I'll never choose to leave you, never." Never being in all caps. Chris replied, "I just don't want to see the hate in your eyes towards me when you get like that." To which Holly responded, "Sorry if I humiliated you. I knew I drank too much and was mad at myself. You didn't do anything wrong." Chris replied, "Do you even want to be with me?" Holly then stated, "Yes, but should I?" Chris closes out the thread by stating, "I want to be with you so much it's ridiculous. I want you to stay sober." The text messages provide a glimpse into the emotional turmoil that the couple was experiencing and the difficulties they faced in resolving their issues. The situation was undoubtedly complex, and it's clear that tensions were running high in the weeks leading up to the horrific incident. On July 13, 2018, Chris enjoyed dinner with friends at a local restaurant. After arriving home, Holly was in a suspicious frame of mind. She went through Chris's phone and found text messages he had sent to a waitress he had met that night. Her fears had been realized, and she had had enough. 3 days later, Holly decided to move out of the house and temporarily stayed with her parents who lived nearby. The next evening, July 17th, Chris had dinner at home with 2 of his adult children, but they noticed he seemed upset and confused. Later that evening, Holly unexpectedly showed up at the house to talk to Chris, and the couple ended up leaving together. They drove to a nearby park and spent hours talking. When they returned to the house, Chris's daughters had already left. Holly decided to stay the night as she had been drinking, but Chris went to bed while she remained awake. Sometime between 11 to 11:30 that night, one of Chris's daughters checked her Instagram and noticed a cryptic post by Holly that read, "If I die tomorrow, what would be the one thing you will always remember about me?" Filled with concern and uncertainty, Chris's daughter immediately texted the cryptic message to her father. However, despite her desperate plea for answers, Chris never responded, and the unsettling feeling lingered. What could it all mean? Then, in the early morning hours of July 18, neighbors reported hearing a series of loud bangs. What happened next would uncover a twisted tale of mystery and tragedy.
Alexa, call 911. Alexa, call 911. Alexa, call Echo.
According to Holly's account, she had been drinking on the evening of July 17 and eventually blacked out. She does not remember much of what happened next, except that when she woke up, she found her husband Christopher shot to death in their bed. In a panic, she searched for her cell phone to call 911 but couldn't find it, so she used an Alexa device to contact her father, Ed Cole. Holly told him what happened and explained that she was too drunk to call the police herself, so her father made the call shortly after 7:30 a.m.
911, where's your emergency?
Is in Dublin.
Okay, I'm in Dublin.
My daughter woke up.
Okay.
She said her husband.
You found her husband dead?
Dublin Police can help you.
Hi, this is Christy at Logan County. I have an Ed Cole on the phone. He has his daughter on the phone that lives at 5709 E. Shannon Place, and they want to report a dead body. Ed, are you there with me? Ed.
Hello? 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 Hi, yes, sir. That was 5709, and what was the street name?
East Shannon Place.
E. Shannon?
Yes, it's over at the golf course.
All right, how do you spell that?
I don't know.
All right, 579 E. Shannon. You don't have any idea how it's spelled?
No. Holly, how you spell it? I have her on Alexa.
Okay, and what's wrong there?
She just woke up. She had passed out, and her husband is dead in bed.
Okay, do you know if he's cold to the touch?
I don't know. She's an RN, but she's inebriated right now, and she just said he's dead in bed.
Okay.
Off her phone.
Are you able to ask her if he's breathing or if it's cold to the touch?
Holly, is he breathing or cold to the touch? She says she don't want to touch him. She's scared.
And are you her son?
No, I'm her father.
Oh, I'm sorry, her father.
She wants somebody there right away.
Okay, how old is your daughter?
42.
All right, I'm typing in the information here. Help is on the way. I just need to get a little bit more information here. Do you know if she's still in the bedroom?
No, she's in the kitchen. She's in the kitchen. She's talking to me on the Alexa.
Okay. Is she unwilling to go back into the bedroom to get a little bit more information?
No, I don't think she needs to. No. She needs to stay right here on.
Okay, what's your daughter's name?
Holly Osborne.
All right, Ed, I just want to make sure I've got your phone number correct, 971?
Yes.
Okay, all right, we've got help on the way. Just let her know to answer the front door, but they should be there shortly.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Dublin police officers responded promptly to the 911 call and were met at the door by Holly. While they did not detect a strong smell of alcohol, they did observe that Holly appeared disheveled and lethargic in demeanor. The officers found her to be so impaired that they were unable to conduct a proper interview until hours later. One officer stated, "She had glassy and bloodshot eyes. She was slurring her speech incredibly bad to the point I had to ask her to repeat names 2 or 3 times." As officers searched the home, they discovered Chris lying in the couple's bed with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene by Washington Township medics. 2 firearms were discovered near the couple's bed, and investigators immediately began conducting interviews. At 3:30 p.m., the Dublin police publicly announced that Christopher's death was the result of a homicide. In response to the seriousness of the crime, the Homicide Division and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation were also called in to assist. While Holly Osborne was considered the prime suspect from the start, she was not immediately arrested as police worked to gather evidence and build their case. Holly was interrogated by detectives as part of the investigation and was subsequently released. "9 months after Chris was found dead in his Dublin home, Franklin County prosecutors charged Holly Osborne with 2 counts of felony murder. Prosecutors allege she shot and killed her husband at point-blank range after she had discovered Chris's latest infidelity. Investigators explained the delay in arresting Holly was due to a backlog of forensic evidence cases to be tested. Holly was arraigned on Wednesday, April 17, 2019.
Thank you, Your Honor. Amy Minfield on behalf of the state of Ohio. First case, the state of Ohio versus Holly M. Osborne, case number 19 CR 1789, 2 counts of murder with 3-year firearm specification.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Tim Murphy on behalf of Ms. Osborne. We entered a plea of not guilty, waive reading of the indictment, time of service, knowledge and arrest date of April 12, 2000.
Do you have anything you want to ask? Yes, Your Honor. Would you like that first or the facts first? You can do that. Thank you, Your Honor. On Wednesday, July 18, 2018, at approximately 7:45 a.m., Dublin police received a call from Logan County Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher advised that someone named Ed Cole was on the line, and he called to report his son-in-law, Chris Osborne, was dead in the city of Dublin. Dublin police officers were dispatched to 5709 East Shannon Place, and upon arrival were led in the home by Holly Osborne. Officers observed that she appeared to be under the influence of alcohol and/or drugs. Officers then moved into the first floor master and observed Holly Osborne's husband, Chris Osborne, was dead on the bed with a gunshot wound to the head, which was located behind and above his right ear. They also observed 2 handguns laying on the floor next to the bed. It was later learned that one belonged to Chris and one belonged to Holly. When his body was moved, 2 more gunshot wounds were observed, one to the right jaw and one to the base of the nose. Nothing was missing from the home, and there were no signs of forced entry. After interviews revealed that Holly and Chris were having a troubled relationship and were in the process of separating with the intent to divorce. It was learned that Holly had a significant problem with alcohol abuse, as well as a history of blackouts, memory loss, and suicide threats. Text messages and voicemails indicate that Holly was depressed and possibly suicidal the night before this happened. Holly admitted to the detectives that she had consumed alcohol that evening and also took a number of prescription medications. BCI advised that samples taken from Holly Osborne's hands and eyebrows tested positive for gunshot residue. They advised that her DNA, and only her DNA, was on the trigger and grip of the revolver found lying on the floor next to the bed. The revolver had 3 spent shell casings in the cylinder, which line up with the 3 gunshot wounds to Chris Osborne's head. We are asking for a bond that's appropriate for the charge and the potential penalty associated with this charge. We'd also ask that no alcohol and she should not be allowed to have non-prescribed any sort of medications. We'd ask that drug and alcohol screens. We'd also ask that she turn over her passport, and if she does make bond, we would ask that she be placed on house arrest and have no contact with the victim's family. Thank you.
The court is going to send a $10,000 recount bond and a $750,000 surety. As a condition of bond, you need to surrender your passport, no alcohol or any non-prescription drugs. Was there anything else, Ms. Van Heulen?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
2 months later, Holly was released on house arrest after posting a reduced bond of $500,000.
This is a case of jealousy and insecurity, and how the defendant, Holly Osborne's jealousy and insecurity caused her to kill her husband, Dr. Christopher Osborne. In the coming days, you will get to know more about their relationship and how Holly Osborne and Dr. Osborne loved each other, but how infidelity was the point of contention in their marriage.
During the trial, prosecutors presented a case that painted Holly as a jealous wife struggling with alcohol issues, fed up with her husband's infidelity, and consumed by her insecurities. Senior Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Daniel Leonard described the crime in graphic detail, alleging that Holly approached her husband as he slept in their bedroom and shot him 3 times in the head at close range. Forensic experts testified to finding Holly's DNA on the grip and trigger of the gun used in the murder. Moreover, gunshot residue was detected on her hands and eyebrows, and ballistics evidence supported the prosecution's theory of Holly's involvement. The prosecution's case was compelling, leaving the defense with a difficult task.
Holly Osborne's not guilty of killing Dr. Osborne. She is not guilty. And I think it's important for us to get up and say that. I understand that the judge told you at the beginning of this case that a trial begins with somebody entering in a not guilty plea. And I understand Mr. Gall got up and talked to you about what that plea means. But it's important for us to tell you eye to eye and face to face. She is not guilty. The court will talk about the burden of proof here. They will tell you that the state has that. The state has told you. We accept that we have to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. They have told you, hold them to that burden. Ladies and gentlemen, all we're going to ask of each and every one of you is to do that. To follow your admonitions, to follow your oath, and to follow the law in this case.
At the outset of the trial, Holly's legal team sought to have the gunshot residue test and statements made to police on the day of the murder deemed inadmissible, citing Holly's alleged intoxication during the police interview. However, the court ultimately rejected this argument, upholding the admissibility of this evidence. During cross-examination, the defense continued its efforts to challenge the prosecution's case by attempting to discredit the gunshot residue testing, questioning whether the death was a homicide or suicide, and even scrutinizing police interviews of Dr. Osborne's former employees.
And so explain that definition of the finding then. It's at the bottom of your report, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So what is that finding? You've identified a particle that's consistent with gunshot residue. What does that mean? Or I'm sorry, characteristic of gunshot residue.
A positive finding, and this is explained on the report, means that that individual either discharged a firearm, they may have just been in close proximity to a firearm when it was discharged, or the other possibility is they handled or came into contact with some other surface that had gunshot residue on it.
Okay. That is the finding that is made anytime that you manually identify the combination of lead, antimony, and barium in one of those samples.
Yes.
Okay. So it's impossible to tell how that GSR got on that sample. It's one of those three ways, though.
Correct. The test cannot determine the relatively likelihood of which of those happened.
Okay. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Either discharged a firearm means you were the one who fired it.
Yes.
In the vicinity of a firearm, meaning you're near it when it's fired.
Yes.
Do you know like how close you need to be to someone firing a weapon in order to be positive for gunshot residue?
Every shooting situation is unique. There's numerous variables. It depends on the type of weapon, the type of ammunition, the condition of the weapon, how many shots were fired. If it's outside, weather conditions can play a factor. That being said, one study did show that people standing within 3 feet to the side of a shooter typically did get gunshot residue on their hands, while people standing 10 feet away did not.
Okay. But yeah, I think you were pretty clear that there's all sorts of factors that can go into that.
Correct.
Okay. And then so the last one, or handled an item with gunshot primer residue on it. Is that transfer GSR?
Yes.
Ultimately, after reviewing all the materials that you've testified that you did review, what is your opinion as to the cause of death and the manner of death in this case?
So after reviewing all the documents and the photographs, my opinion was that Mr. Osborne died of gunshot wounds of head and neck, and manner of death is homicide, and it's agreeing with Dr. Poyman's report.
Okay. Is that opinion or based on or made with a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
Okay. Why homicide and not suicide?
Because the wounds, first of all, there were 3 wounds. Then secondly, there was, it was not close contact. It was not touching the skin. There was intermediate range. And they were two different, very high fatal kind of injuries. In terms of high cervical neck was hit. That would cause the person to be paralyzed. The top of the head was hit. That can cause person to die also. So between the both of them, they were fatal injuries.
Okay. And so although we can't determine the order in which these gunshot wounds were received, a combination of any of these, you're not going to get to that 3rd gunshot wound.
You can't get to that, and then the combination of these, like the fact that there were these 3 and where they were located and what they injured, it's difficult to do self-infliction of those wounds.
Is there a preference for how soon a GSR sample is supposed to be taken?
As soon as possible.
Okay. And is that just generally because over the passage of time you're going to risk potentially getting a strong sample?
GSR evidence is known to be very easily destroyed. Okay. So it's something that's important to try and gather quickly before it is destroyed.
You did not test her clothing for GSR?
Correct.
And prior to your testing of her hands for gunshot residue, her hands were not bagged or in any way?
No.
And she consented to being tested for GSR?
Yes.
So why are you asking or going to speak to all these ex-employees again?
To see if there's anything else that we need to know.
Okay. And some of these employees are people that had actually been essentially fired by Dr. Osborne whenever the practice had transitioned?
Correct.
Okay.
In the end, the defense hoped they had poked enough holes in the prosecution's case by highlighting inconsistencies and flaws in the evidence presented to the jury. After a one-week trial, the jury retreated to begin deliberations.
We, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn in this case, find the defendant, Holly M. Osborne, guilty of murder as charged in count 1 of the indictment. We, the jury, do further find that the defendant did have a firearm on or about her person or under her control while committing said offense, and the defendant displayed and or brandished and or indicated that they possessed the firearm and or used the firearm to facilitate the offense, signed this 6th day of October 2022 by each and every juror. We, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn in this case, find the defendant, Holly M. Osborne, guilty of murder as charged in count 2 of the indictment. We, the jury, do further find that the defendant did have a firearm on or about her person or under her control while committing said offense, and the defendant displayed and or brandished and or indicated that they possessed the firearm and or used the firearm to facilitate the offense, signed this 6th day of October 2022 by each and every juror. Counsel, on behalf of the state, would you like to poll the jurors?
No, Your Honor.
Counsel, on behalf of Ms. Osborne, would you like to poll the jurors?
No, Your Honor.
You all can be seated briefly. Ms. Osborne, you can be seated.
In the end, Holly Osborne was convicted of the murder of her husband, Dr. Christopher Osborne, while he slept in their Dublin home in 2018. A Franklin County judge subsequently sentenced her to 18 years to life in prison. Holly's public defenders indicated that she plans to appeal the case and requested that she be granted a bond while the appeal process takes place. However, the judge denied the request for bond, meaning that Holly would remain behind bars while the appeal process moves forward. The case of Holly and Christopher Osborne is undoubtedly a tragedy, and our thoughts go out to all those affected by this devastating loss of life. It serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of prioritizing mental and emotional health and seeking help when needed to prevent feelings of jealousy, anger, and resentment from escalating to dangerous levels. At the same time, this case also highlights the tireless efforts of law enforcement officials and forensic experts who worked diligently to bring justice to Chris and his family. Through their careful and meticulous investigation, they were able to gather the evidence needed to hold those responsible accountable for their actions. Looking back on this case, it's natural to wonder if there was anything that could have been done differently to prevent such a tragic outcome. While we may never know for sure, it's important to continue the conversation around mental and emotional health and to work together as a community to support those in need. Only through increased awareness, education, and compassion can we hope to reduce the prevalence of incidents like this. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe there are steps that could have been taken to prevent this needless loss of life? As usual, Feel free to share your thoughts below.